Welcome back. You're listening to Within Tolerance, a podcast for machinists by a machinist. I'm your host, Dylan Jackson from Bodony and Machining. And this week I am joined by two past guests and hosts of probably my favorite new podcast, Incremental,
Ooh.
Devin Bodony and Uriel Eisen. Welcome, guys.
Hey,
Hey, thanks for having us.
Of
favorite new
course. Yeah.
podcast.
Yeah.
Of course. Yeah. You guys talk about a lot of things that like I don't think about super often, and so it's really nice weekly to kind of be reminded like, oh yeah, start like thinking this way too, like in addition to head down making parts. It's like there's a lot left to think about at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think honestly that's why we started it as well, is because we needed our own reminder to not just put our heads down and actually think about it. So yeah, it's been good.
Definitely.
Yeah, it's great. Well, Uriel, you were on fairly recently, but Devin, since the last time you were on, you've added, I think, employees and machinery.
Yep. Yeah. Decent little bit of both. Let's see. Added a Takasawa lathe. I think we had just bought the second Brother S700, but just recently got the Brother R450. Added an automatic saw, a bunch of little stuff like a screw air compressor, laser marking. We got our tumbling setup going, and then a lot of little stuff like an actual cabinet for organizing tooling, and bunch of small kind of accessory stuff. But yeah, the big ticket items were the Takasawa lathe and the R450.
Well, congrats. That's awesome.
It's been fun. The wild ride. Yeah, you just kind of like just hold on and don't let go and hope everything's pointed in the right direction.
Yeah, that's definitely small business ownership kind of rolled into one right there.
Yeah. And then, two employees. One started, I guess it's been about a year and a half ago now. Well, actually, she started like 2 years ago, but just part-time for about I think 8 months. While she finished up a school program and another part-time job. And then she came on full-time. And that was pretty awesome. It was just her and I for about a year. And then just this last Thanksgiving added a second employee. We were talking about that being kind of like a slow ramp part-time deal, but I think it was like 3 weeks. And I was like, okay, you should just be here. And he's been super awesome as well.
And past machining experience, I assume then?
No, not really. Neither of them. So Ariel, the first employee, she had a lot of restaurant experience. She's kind of generally mechanically inclined, but not a lot of like power tool experience, I guess you'd say. Actually, the school program she was in when she started was a car mechanics certificate. Yeah.
Oh,
so she's she's got like a general, knowledge of mechanics, hand tools, kind of like how things fit together, but no machining experience. And then Coram, the new guy, has a lot of woodworking experience. Like actually he's pretty young, but very talented woodworker. And then we met through bikes, and back before I took work seriously and thought I was going to be a bike frame builder, he would hang out in the shop and kind of tinker and help me with little stuff here and there. And like started teaching himself to weld and, would mess around a little bit on different machines. So his kind of like general CNC knowledge is a lot less than Ariel's at this point. He's much more comfortable on the manual machines, I'd say. So I can kind of like task him with simple manual machine projects when needed. And he's really good at like just general like carpentry. So like the first couple months he was with us, we were doing a lot of changes in the shop, getting ready for bringing in the new machine. And so it was easy to be like, okay, build a shelf there. Okay, we need a food snack station there. Like push that wall back and put in a counter. And he's very capable of that stuff, which is pretty helpful. Not every day, but when you need it, you need it. So
yeah, that's great, and keeps you on programming and setup and all that stuff.
Yeah, that's the hope.
Awesome. Well,
Yeah.
I mean, you kind of mentioned the R450. Let's just jump into the questions. Joe from Cobra Frame Building was asking about bar feeding the R450. Uriel and I have talked about that when he was on. what are your thoughts on that? Is that something you guys are both thinking about implementing? And then he kind of wanted to also, talk more about part gripper workflow for high mix, low volume, which you've been doing a lot, Devin.
Yeah. I am not planning to bar feed the R450, at least not yet. I think, Uriel and I talk a lot about, and I think we have an interesting perspective coming from, his is a pretty low mix shop, I would say, a handful of dedicated parts. Mine is a fairly high mix. So I think the constraints around bar feeding probably will mean that I'm not going to pursue that. Also, I like to, as much as possible, have my jobs be able to run on any of the 3 machines that we have. So trying to maintain as much consistency in setups across the board is something I strive for. So I'm not probably going to pursue bar feeding, at least unless we get, move shops into some larger space and get some crazy contract or something.
Yeah, right now trying to bar feed that machine where it is in your shop would be impractical at best.
No, the bar would definitely just pierce the lathe. About 3.5 feet apart.
Oh boy.
Although I feel like with a gripper you could bar pull onto the table and not need a bar feeder. That was one thing I didn't quite understand, why you'd need a bar feeder for that whole setup.
Oh, yeah.
That saves you like $30K or something.
Yeah, that'd be nice. You just all you need is some of those cheap in-feed saw racks
yeah, exactly.
from Home Depot.
And make sure no one kicks them
while it's running. Don't touch this. Yeah. Oh, yeah, I guess.
Yeah, I think it was more the bar storage than anything that the bar feeder enables you.
Yeah, probably. If you want to run overnight, run 10 bars.
Yeah.
That said, exactly. I've been looking at robots, and there's a $5,000, $6,000 Scara robot, and that in conjunction with an auto saw is a lot more flexible, and so that's something to keep in mind.
Yeah, you just got to figure out how to time your auto saw so that it matches your cycle time and isn't just overloading the Scara with a bunch of work.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah,
but even if you integrate the inefficiency of carrying the stock from the saw over to the Scara robot, that gets you less management, and then the next step of setting up a saw at the machine.
Yeah. Oh, you're talking about carrying. Gotcha.
Well, either way, but I just feel like
it would be pretty slick to have a saw just mated to a machine,
definitely,
and a robot, and it just spits out one.
Yeah,
and puts it
that's
in the
definitely the long-term dream.
Yeah,
because the other thing is there's no bar feeding an R450. Think about it more after looking at that robot. It's not actually great, because if you can run a cheap saw right next to the machine that feeds into a robot, that is much more cost efficient, right? And you're not adding the cycle time of parting off your part in the machine. So I think the advantage of doing the part off in the R450 instead of right outside in an auto saw would be potentially part holding, right? You would waste, you could get really good holding even on really weird small parts without just way oversizing your stock. But besides that, I think pushing it to the outside of the cabinet has its advantages, cycle time.
Well, and you could take advantage of both pallets.
That is a very good point.
Yeah.
Right. And do all your loading on
one.
The other side and take your time with chip clearing and seating the part properly and all that.
Yeah.
I've been thinking about, with the R450, mounting a laser in the cabinet and the operator side, because it's all fully located. And so if you wanted to do deep etching, I thought that would be super cool to pallet change. You'd have to blow off the parts. It didn't have coolant, but then you could etch right in the vise before unloading.
Did you ever figure out, Devin, I think we were talking that can you slow down the 4th axis turning, or the pallet changer, which I guess is technically the 4th axis?
Oh yeah.
Weren't we the ones talking about that?
Manually? When you're
no, I think we were talking about slowing down, or maybe I'm thinking of Andrew. Somebody with an R series, I was talking to them about slowing down the pallet change.
I would think so. I mean, you can adjust the parameters for all your other rapids, and it's driven by the rapid override. So if you have your rapids on 4, the pallet change happens slower. So I would think it would just be one of those. What's that?
Which is nice, especially if you're pallet changing and stuff that was technically too big.
Yeah, I did learn a little bit about that.
Do tell.
So the machines come with or they have the option of the expanded jig area, they call it. It takes the swing on the R450 from from a meter to 1100 millimeters. Which, doesn't sound like a whole lot, but it's an extra 2 inches on the radius effectively.
10%.
Yeah, it's a good piece. It basically means that you can hang your work holding pretty far off of the table. The R450 is a cool machine because it's very compact physically, like on the floor. Although I will say I sold it to my employees as being like this little, dainty thing that wasn't going to take up any space in the shop. And then
it's all relative.
Yeah. I'm standing by the fact that the square footage is small, but it has a large presence. It's very tall. Anyway,
for 2 tables, it is a small machine, but like I know tables, the F600 is kind of based on that same thing, and like compared to an S700, it is significantly deeper.
Yeah.
And like a little bit narrower, but not terribly. I think the 450 is a little narrower than the F600, but still, it's like, you don't really realize how deep that machine is until it's like in your shop and you're like, oh, okay, that's a lot of floor space.
Yeah, it's deep and it's just tall. So it's kind of imposing. You walk up to it and it's like, ooh. But it's a cool machine. The work envelope obviously is pretty small, but assuming you're not trying to do a bunch of parts at once and your parts are relatively small, you actually get a lot of table space to work with. So each pallet is just under 24 inches wide. So you get about 4 feet of total X kind of table to work with. And then with the expanded jig area, you can hang, I think it's about an additional 3 inches off of both sides with whatever it is, so long as it doesn't extend past that radius and doesn't extend too high to swing under the opening in the divider wall. So it's a cool machine for that reason.
And I'm guessing from the foreshadowing, you didn't get the extended jig option?
No, I did get the extended jig option.
I knew you were even past that.
I did, yeah. But then, so I went to hang the fourth off the table because we needed space to do the first kind of job that we were running on it. And so I started like manually jogging it around to check for clearance, and it totally just was going to just smash into the Z axis, or I guess it's actually the Y axis way cover, that like rolling, it's not an accordion, but it's like that funny slat. It's like
chainmail almost or something.
Yeah, exactly. The chainmail way cover.
Yeah.
It was just going to smack the hell into it. And I was like, what is wrong here? And we'd had this issue when they were setting it up, where when they do the expanded jig area, they add these little wings onto the center divider to like take up the extra opening to keep stuff from spraying through. And they were clipping on the little rivets on that thing.
Oh, geez.
Yeah, it was super strange. And the guy was like, the person setting it up was like, I don't know what's going on with this. You should probably just trim them down. And I was kind of like, that doesn't seem right, but what?
This is brand new. What do you mean?
Yeah. We did trim them down because we're like, well, I guess that's the only option. And then it was like a series of a few things. So we did that. We trimmed them down, and then I did moved the fourth, and it was totally just going to full on just hard parts smack. And I called up my salesperson. I was like, what is going on? Is there something wrong with this machine? Like, was it assembled incorrectly? And I was in the car, I was running to the bank, and like, as I was driving home, this light bulb went off. And for anybody who's ever looked at that machine, there's this like weird cutout in the chainmail thing, in the chainmail way cover. And I'd looked at it for years and been like, why did it, just in demo videos or whatever, and been like, what is that about? Like, what purpose could that possibly serve? It turns out that when the X axis is centered and the Y axis is all the way back, that cutout allows for the expanded jig area to clear. Yeah.
That's such a brother thing. Like,
It's such a brother
we've
thing.
made the stars align so that everything works, but just barely.
Yeah, just barely, but because we get there so fast, it doesn't matter.
Right. So you're using, because there's a parameter that will send it to a safe location for a palette change, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And like, if you don't have that option, that is like the back right corner, which is also kind of the tool change position. Like if you're going to manually change tools at
That
the
makes
side
sense.
door. Yeah. So yeah, interestingly, the people I was talking with at Yamazin didn't really know how to change it. I kind of had to figure it out myself, and then sent them the parameters back. I was like, next time you do one of these, here's what you need to do.
Yeah, because you can also send it to a tool loading location as well. I remember on that machine,
which is pretty
which
slick.
is nice. Yeah.
It's cool.
It was really frustrating. We had the M series at my last job, and I really wanted to use that too because, you know, if the Y is all the way back, the head is like 6 feet back from the operator door on the M series. And it's like,
wow.
can I have it come here? And they're like, no, it seems like it's only enabled for the R series.
Weird.
Like, oh, that's such a missed opportunity.
Yeah, super missed. It is interesting running those machines. Like I feel like I get just a little bit of a window into what it would be like to run a machine with a big like tool matrix or something where you can't actually see the tools. Because I feel like on the S series we get kind of spoiled where you just like peek through the window and you're like, that tool, they're all in there.
Right.
And on the R series, like half of them you can't see from any door at any one time.
Yeah, it's the same with the F. I can only see, I think, maybe 6 in front, and then everything else is on the chain up behind the machine.
Yeah, so it's kind of a good way to start working out that workflow, making sure you have your tool management dialed pretty good.
Well, so the other half of Joe's question was about pros and cons of a palette changer machine, and because I had some cons for sure with our spark changer, but I will say not a lot of the cons, but a few big cons that we had with the spark changer are solved by the R series. So like you can actually, like you said, jog your pallet changer and check for clearances where the kitty was hydraulic, I think, or like there was no speed on it. It was just 100%. So like we would cut out cardboard cutouts of whatever large thing we were loading in there, and then like tape them to the bed, and then just see if they whipped into the side of the machine when we pallet changed. And it was like, yeah,
That
okay,
does
cleared.
not seem
That'll be
ideal.
fine.
Yeah, that's terrifying.
And then also you don't have to worry about the clamping studs on your pallets ever getting fouled up with chips because it's never unclamped. It's just on a rotary.
Yeah. There is a brake, but there's no studs and it doesn't lift. I don't know if it's physically awkward to proof a program just because you have to kind of like lean in over the other pallet.
Right. Well, that was
that's
my
different
other
on
big
the 600,
downside.
650, right?
Yeah. The 650 has the control at the side. So that's removed. So that's kind of like, I wouldn't, if you were strictly prototyping, this is not the machine probably. Although there's some arguments to be made for all that table space and keeping multiple, fixturing options set up. But that's probably better handled in a
0 point or something,
a 0 point or a 1000 or something like that. That's so far, that's kind of the only downside I can see. I guess there's a part height limit, but it's pretty significant. I think you get 12 inches from the table of like Z clearance to swing underneath the divider wall.
It does seem like in a like purely prototyping environment, it would really not be ideal because you'd be like trying to figure out if it can swing.
Yeah, it's one of those. Yeah, it's definitely one of those things. Like when I got the first S series, people were like, "That's not a prototype machine." It's kind of like, well, it does the things that a prototype machine does. It's just in an enclosure and it's quick. Running this machine, I am like, yeah, it's not an ideal prototype machine. Like visibility is limited. It's a little bit more awkward physically to proof a program. There's more to like chips hang up in more places. There's more to clean, kind of things like that. But aside
You've also
from
been
that,
running some higher volumes though in there, right?
Yeah. I will say one thing about it is like, again, kind of coming back to like refining your processes. On a standard VMC, you open the door pretty often, and kind of get a chance to check in with things like the health of your tools, odd things that might be happening in the enclosure, something out of place. On the R series, like you only really ever interact with the pallet that's not being cut. And, you know, assuming something doesn't sound awful, and you don't notice it in your part, you're not going to notice that something's going wrong.
It's kind of terrifying, especially with such a productive machine.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
Like it can make scrap pretty quick. So yeah, we are running some higher volume stuff right now. Like 1,000-piece run. I mean, it's 6 part numbers, but they're all identical fixturing, identical tooling. So it's a big job. Let's see. I don't know if there's a lot of downsides. I think if you were doing anything from 20-piece to 1,000-piece, it probably is 20-piece to 1,000-piece. 20-piece if your cycle time is like, I don't know, 10 or 20 minutes or more. But like if you have a job that's going to run for a day, I don't think the setup would be any more significant on an R series than an S series, and it will absolutely run it faster, like hands away faster.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Because of the actual speed of the machine, or
no, just because of the
setup. Like
it's really not
setup.
even the like. I mean, it's just the fact that you don't have to arrive exactly when the cycle ends. So
that is nice.
It's really nice. Yeah. So like there's the palette change part, which is fantastic. Like just in like the speed of the palette change, but the more important thing in my shop is just not having
the next thing is
pacey.
ready to run.
Yeah.
And you can get to it at any point in the cycle time.
Yeah. So like if you had an S series or any VMC with a person parked in front of it, you'd probably come close to keeping up. You know, there would be the time delay of actually changing your part on the table. But I think the bigger benefit is just that you don't have to park somebody there.
When I imagine it allows you to have a little bit more complex fixtures. Like I feel like we're constantly playing that game of like, do I put the extra clamp, but then knowing that it's going to take me an extra 20 seconds to take it on and off. Whereas like on the R, you're like, oh, it doesn't matter. Like the machine's running. Like why not make the fixture as the best it can be, you know, kind of thing.
I mean, it's a little column A, a little column B, because like, you know, we're doing this 1,000-part run, and it was like, okay, this is gonna be 5,000 unscrew cycles to get these parts done. Like let's make sure these are the right screws, and let's make it as efficient as possible. But also, yes, like those parts that we're running right now are pretty like a little bit of a labor intensive part changeover, and it did make it, you know, you can do it not rushed and not worry about your cycle time increasing. So that was a big benefit.
Yeah. And I would say, like,
for sure,
looking at an R machine, I think for prototyping, again, probably doesn't make a ton of sense, but like that's probably going to be our next machine. And not only for the obvious reasons of like a pallet changes, so you can, I don't know, higher spindle uptime. I think because of the traveling column, it gives you a lot more flexibility long term in terms of automation, in terms of like bar feeding the machine or bar pulling onto the table. I think something really exciting to look at is also automating an R450 or an R650. You have all that time, like typically if you watch a robot loading, like tending a VMC, you have quite a bit of time with the door open because the robots are pretty slow, just relative to a person. And so like doing a pallet change to that position where the spindle's running, like you could do all of these checks, QC checks, or, you know, making sure there's no chips, just all sorts of stuff. Like thinking about getting a robot on one of those is pretty appealing.
Yeah, that's pretty high on my list, I'd say, at some point. Not tomorrow, but at some point.
Well, and I imagine for you, Uriel, like you would be able to set up, you know, 2 or 3 part numbers permanently, pretty much, like depending on the pallet. Like you could have two 4th axis on there, and have, you know, buckles on one, and like, you know, pretty much all of your stuff set up and ready to go.
Yeah, I mean, if I could, that would be living the dream for sure.
Yeah, definitely. I guess the other question there was the gripper stuff.
So how are you handling high mix, low volume stuff with the gripper? Because it seems from the outside like that would be a difficult strategy to apply to a high mix workflow?
Yeah, at first blush it does. And yeah, Uriel and I had probably 6 or 8 months of conversations before we kind of like zeroed in on a solution. Um, I think it's important to back up and not fixate on like, not look at what's holding the end actuator so much as being the limiting factor, because at the end of the day, or the end of arm tooling or whatever, at the end of the day, kind of like a robot's a robot. And then there's just a set of variables of like, where's your stock? How's it situated? And how do you, increment and pick up and stuff. And so I think if you stop thinking about it as being very distinct, then it pretty quickly becomes clear that like the problems that you have to solve are more or less the same problems, whether it's a robot or your spindle. I think, and then like so like if you take that sort of out of the equation, and then looking at the systems more broadly, whether you're looking at high mix or low mix, there's like a couple pros and cons, I'd say, of the two systems, regardless of what your mix is or your volume. The pro, or I guess maybe I'll start with the cons. Basically, the cons of the gripper system in my mind are space. Basically, you're limited by your travel. And then a big one that no one really talks about that is just that it's extremely powerful. So like,
that's true.
A robot crash, I don't think is going to destroy your VMC for most of the robots, people sort of in our sphere would be looking at. Whereas like when the Z axis with a spindle gripper crashes, like it's a legit crash.
Until you use 3D printed fingers.
Right.
Which are pretty great.
Yeah.
Yes. Mechanical fuses are the best.
Yeah. Mechanical fusing. Exactly. So let's see. Are there any other cons that I'm missing here?
Well, I think just knowing Joe and talking to him a good bit, the comparison you didn't hit is to humans loading the machine, right? So like, sure. How do you think about using a spindle gripper on sort of low volume, high mix as it relates to just programming it and having a person load the machine?
Gotcha.
Maybe.
Yeah. I think it comes back to that pacing issue of, basically just walk away time. So I noticed that the parts that we run on that, even though we're generally, so with our high mix system, we run 10 parts per cycle, regardless of the size of part. We're not trying to adapt for like optimum efficiency of space on the table. We're just trying to say, okay, we're going to get 10 parts per cycle, sort of regardless. And that's going to be a big win.
The big win there is you sacrifice efficiency in the machine to efficiency at the programming and implementing the gripper, right?
Well, and a big win in terms of how often a person has to come to the machine and how many parts are done per cycle. And then, so then the comparison would be a high density fixturing, right? But the big win there for the gripper over high density fixturing is finger time, I guess. So like tightening, loosening screws, placing stock.
Finger time, is that a industry standard?
I don't know if it's an industry. That's an Andy statement.
I like it though.
Yeah, no, it's good. Like it very quickly zeroes in on what the issue is.
Yeah.
And having done
more specifically though, like, so are you standardizing on pieces of stock and then saying anything that comes through quoting that fits in this stock runs on this machine? And are you just leaving that machine set up for finger gripping high mix, or how does that all work? Because like, I think when I look at it, I'm like, well, like you said, space wise, you pretty much have to have 3 parts worth of space for every part that you're making. Because like, before stock, machining location, and after machining location for it to sit. And then on top of it, it's like, how do I take parts coming into my shop and make sure that they're a good fit? So are you standardizing on one size stock, or a few that the gripper can hold? How did you determine that?
Yeah, no, I tried to make it more adaptable than that. So the macro that runs the gripper program is parameter driven. So I just said if it's within a certain envelope on 1/4 inch increments. So basically when we set up a job, we just say this is, 2 inches wide by 3 1/4 long. And then the tray has just pinholes that you move dowel pins for your different size stocks on those increments. So you can't do like a 3 1/8 inch piece, but you can do 3 or 3 1/4. So like small sacrifice there in terms of stock utilization. And then when you enter in those values in the macro, it adjusts the pick and place pickup, or the location for the pick and place automatically. So I guess not to get too much into the weeds, but the way both Uriel and I kind of started with a macro set that came from Yamazen from who knows when. Somebody, I'm sure, wrote it someday at some factory, and then it became the standard. So we started with that. It's kind of like a master macro with I think 3 or 4 sub programs.
I forget what it started with.
Yeah, it's like a go-to pick, and then it's like a go-to place.
Yeah, and the way they broke that out was kind of odd. Like some stuff was in the master program, some stuff was in the
Anyway, we started with that. We both refined ours separately, and adjusted as we wanted to. But basically, so those they like the go to pick, the go to place, they all just are driven by parameters that you input in that master macro. So that's it's like a few minutes basically to update it for a new part size. And then for the space issue, I don't put anything back on the tray, so you're not having to have 3 basically tripling up your space requirement on the table. So I have a stock tray, and then the way I'm handling it right now, I still need to update it, but there just hasn't been enough time. The way I'm handling it right now is that parts get picked to the vise, you run op 1, parts get picked out of the vise and just dumped in a little bin by the gripper. And then right now we do a manual flip back onto the dowel pins on spacers, so they're hanging on the top hat, and the actual part just hangs in negative space below, and we still pick on the top hat. So op 2, part gets picked, placed in the vise, and then gripper's done, and the vise is on the 4th axis, it flips over and blasts the part out into a little bin with air. So that's kind of how we handle the space issue of not having to triple it up on the table.
Gotcha. How are you preventing parts from dinging each other coming out of the vise after op 2?
It hasn't been too much of an issue. I kind of anticipated it would be a problem. It hasn't been. I wouldn't do super high value parts that way, I don't think. That's not totally true. I had one where it was being an issue. I put a bunch of rubber in the bin, so they didn't bang around as much.
And that solved it?
Yeah, that solved it.
Nice.
For that particular part. I think it could vary somewhat. The goal would be to go to a double vise system, double gripper, I think at this point, and a flip station. So you're only really handling the part from the tray to the vise, to flip station, to second vise, and then second gripper with 3D printed fingers to pick the finished part out, and then probably to a bin as well.
And on an R450, you can get parts out every cycle.
Yeah, because they would go back to the other pallet.
Potentially nifty.
Right.
Yeah,
or
that'd
you
be
could
great.
go over to a chute or something that goes out of the machine because it's a traveling column.
Yeah,
right.
There's lots of options there.
Tons of fun ideas.
So I would say, yes, in theory, we edit every part that we get that fits in that envelope goes on the gripper, but in reality, it's still a decently small percentage of our work. Kind of varies depending on what we get. Like right now, we have a ton of work. Most of it's just simply too big to be handled that way. And then the way we handle different stock sizes is we just have pre-cut jaws on those 1/4 inch increments, or fingers, I should say, and jaws for op 1.
Gripper fingers and vice jaws.
Yeah, sorry. Gripper fingers and vice jaws. For
so
the different
I
increments.
assume that you're not keeping this machine set up for that workflow then, if you currently don't have any work that'll fit it. So how long is your speaking of like SMED, how long
Yeah.
is your setup for this kind of workflow? Is the grippers always in there, or how do you break it down? How do you set it back up reliably and quickly?
Yeah, it's there's a long way to go, honestly. It could be a lot better, but I think it's probably about a half hour.
Oh, that's not bad at all.
No, for the hardware, and then there's the the setup that would be with any part of like proofing it and cutting jaws and stuff, but that would happen regardless. It might be less than a half an hour, honestly. So right now, the way we handle it is our tray goes onto one of the Delta pallet systems on an orange vise. So that's just swapping the jaw carriers for the Delta pallet carriers, and then probing the tray, and then and then the vise itself is always on our trunnion on the 4th axis, and so that's an established work coordinate system that we just keep set up. So that's just like swapping vise on the rock lock and plugging in some hoses. So that's pretty straightforward. And then we usually just have to bolt the 2 bins to the table.
That's not bad at all.
No, it's pretty quick. And then honestly, the most time consuming part of it is if we're changing stock sizes is moving all the pins in the tray. And really the only reason, and I don't have a good solution for this yet, but really the only reason that part is challenging is because you have to blow chips out of the other holes. Otherwise it'd be pretty quick. So our 450 maybe will solve that.
Yeah. Huh. All right. So I had a couple questions that I came up with because I think you guys you're great at talking about improvements you're currently doing. But I would like to talk kind of about improvements that maybe did not go that great. So what's the most money or time you've sunk into an improvement that didn't pay off?
One that comes immediately to mind, maybe it's not the most, but it's still sore. I was trying to print over Wi-Fi with Octoprint, and it did not go well at all. It's meant to be an easy setup. I probably spent about 12 hours on it total. Finally got it working, and then the other day it stopped working. And at this point, it's like, I don't know if we'll see if I'll. That said, after I got it working, I realized I do all my CAD at one end of the shop, and then the 3D printer is currently at the other end of the shop. And so this would be a good example of improving the transportation method of going from like SneakerNet to Wi-Fi, when instead I could just decrease the need for transportation by moving the 3D printer near the CAD computer.
Right.
And then just plugging it in with a either USB or directly to the computer or going Ethernet to a switch or something. So that is one that I don't know if I would do something differently in the future. I'm not really sure, but it really did not pan out at all.
Yeah. I'm thinking for myself, Uriel was talking on our podcast a couple weeks ago about how an incomplete improvement is nothing but waste. So on the gripper front, currently have about $12,000 in shunk vices and a lot of material for new trunnions that is just sitting there because I haven't had time to implement the system. So yeah, that kind of hurts right now.
I think a lot of people can empathize with that. I have a shelf of half finished projects or boxes of McMaster orders that still haven't materialized.
Yeah, same. I think one thing we've been moving to, which I think has already sort of borne fruit, is kind of just a whip board. So just being a little bit more diligent about like, are we truly done with this improvement, or does it still need a little bit more work? Because oftentimes they get to like 80 or 90% where they are delivering value, but they're still like not amazing. And then so just that's been helpful already. And we're not fully switched over to like, I don't know, we reference it daily, but it's not, we haven't made like any explicit rules around it so much, but it does help that they're actually like persistently on there instead of just out of sight, out of mind. I
don't know if we've had any like major fails in our shop. I think the biggest issue for us has just been like false starts more than anything. That like that. I wouldn't say this is a false start, but an incomplete incomplete project. I've had quite a few of those just kind of like hang, and they're just like, yeah, something you have to think about, bunch of money tied up.
I would say for me, another kind of category of poorly directed improvements. I think when I started doing this, I did a lot more kind of flashy things where I'd have an idea and then chase it. And they often were improvements, but they, like an example would, like the same example of 3D printing, right? I could have moved the 3D printer, and that's a lot simpler than doing anything else. And that should have been, there should have been some process in thinking about all the potential fixes to a some noticed issue, and I think we've been doing more and more sort of like actual process around thinking through a bunch of different potential improvements to a particular problem, and then sort of thinking about like easy ways of testing them, and kind of moving through it maybe a little bit more slowly, but a little bit less rework, I guess. Or, I think it's easy at the beginning to go like, oh, shiny new toy. Yes, please. I'll go buy something cool.
Right.
And
this money will fix my problems.
Yeah.
I gotcha. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I want to get on to Alex Kern's question because I think you guys brought it up, but real quick, I'll share mine are, we bought a 85 Kitamura before we bought our old brother, the TC.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah.
And we were like, oh, we'll fix it up and use it, and that'll be great. And then it sat in our shop for 6 months before we sold it after spending probably an entire 2 or 3 days taking it apart to clean it.
Oh yeah.
And so that was like, $3 or $4 grand to buy the machine and ship it down to us. And then all the time taking it apart, and then absolutely no benefit from it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's rough.
Our piston compressor that we bought one of those Whisper piston compressors between our first compressor and our now Eaton compressor, and it was neither quiet. It was a good compressor, but it was not quiet. Like it was quieter than like our, it was probably like a Husky compressor or something that we had, or Ingersoll, but like it didn't, for the money we spent on it, we should have just saved like a little bit extra and bought a screw compressor right off the bat.
Yeah,
that was incredibly frustrating.
I mean, years back at this point, I remember spending days of research and then buying bits and putting them together to avoid buying an air dryer. And then I bought an air dryer.
Yeah. I guess if we turn the lens back a few years, there's a lot of things I'd probably rather not talk about. Certainly bought my fair share of machines I shouldn't have that I then sold at a loss.
Yeah. And then I'd say my last one that I sunk a lot of money and time into was our orange subplate for S700. And it was great for putting the vices on and not having to indicate them. But like the whole reason we went down that route was to do what we're doing, or starting to do with our laying now, and like having a actual master location to go off of.
Yeah.
And so we spent all this time, I built a vacuum plate that fit it, and I built a adapter for a fourth and all this. And it's like, no, I'm having to remake all of this stuff again. And it's like,
why wasn't that a good option in the end?
The way that it works, there's not like with laying, the center of 4 studs is the 0 point. It is a true ZPS, a zero point system, where with the orange, the way that the pins worked and the single or double-sided actuation, there was no concrete place you could measure a 0 point off of. So like I would either have to make a reference palette for every location and then set that in my control and cam and all of that, and backfeed all that information, or what we ended up doing was just not really following through with that because it was just too much work.
Yeah, not a good solution.
So, but I mean, it works. Like if we were running our own part with pallets or something, it repeated great. Like it was just not the solution. I did a poor job of both communicating my needs when I bought it and doing my research into what it actually worked as. And then it took me probably 2 years to figure out what the hell I was doing. And by that point I was like, oh,
interesting.
All right, a lot of time and money into this.
Yeah. I have a funny example that reminds me of our own 0 point. I don't know if saga maybe is an overstatement. I got a screaming deal on a bunch of Shunk 0 point stuff. And so that's what we're running. And it is so convenient and so fast and repeats extremely well. because we bought it used, and it was cheaper than Lang would have been, so it was like kind of hard to say no. But some of the chucks have a little relief cut into them, so they have a locating pin. So if you only want to use one locating stud or like pull down stud, it then has a second little pin that sort of indexes for rotation, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
Because we bought it used, ours are not that type, and so you need to have two studs in a pallet, which for the size stuff we're doing is kind of annoying. And those studs are, I forget the price, they're quite expensive. And so then your total pallet ends up being big, heavy, and expensive. And the other piece, for us, it's not been an issue, but if I was setting up a prototyping machine, I would not want to sacrifice that much Z. Like I think a Lang just makes a lot more sense, especially if it's for things where you're not really switching out pallets regularly. You're more switching out like work holding solutions. So whether that's like switching to a vise to run a job, or switching to, you could even switch to a shunk hold down for pallet changing. Because for pallet changing, I mean, they're really quite nice. But anyway, so I think we got sort of the wrong thing because it was very inexpensive, and I'm not sure that the cost savings was worth it.
Gotcha. Yeah, that could be tough for sure. All right, so Alex Kern, you guys brought it up. Alex Kern asked, what do you do to maintain worthy improvements? Said differently, are there systems, documentation, et cetera, that show potential future employees what improvements are and why they exist? And so you brought up a work in progress board, which is great, but do you guys do any further documentation or way of communicating that?
Yeah, so that's been actually a big focus in our shop because as the team grows, even not future employees, but current employees, if one person sort of runs one station typically day to day and makes a lot of improvements, there's no feedback and there's no sort of, like you said, like, why is this now the way we do it? And what is the current method? So it's something we've been thinking a lot about. The training videos have been good because they're very quick to make, and then they're just available if you ever need them. But I think we're going to start doing more SOPs, standard operating procedures, trying to figure out exactly what that looks like and exactly how we build that into our workflow so that they actually happen reliably. Basically innovation is outstripping documentation in our shop, and it's becoming an issue. The other thing which is interesting to read about and just talking to different people about solutions is as you add detail to an SOP, it becomes like less of a reference document for people who actually know how to do it. But the second it's no longer a reference document, if someone else makes an update, that doesn't tend to propagate because you're basically running off of like memory instead of continually referencing some sort of documents. And so it seems like what other people do and have success with is kind of having like 2 or 3 levels of documents where you have one that is just like a memory tool checklist that's very short, like maybe 6 items. And then you'll have those 6 items sort of more explained about not just the how, but also a bit of the why. But then you'll have a separate document where it's like insane amount of detail. But we don't have those. Right. It's a lot of work to build those. So
yeah. I think even like a change log, like you can keep your source document fine, just the 6 steps you need, but then having a change log that's like, hey, on September 2nd, I changed it from this to this because I'm fixing this problem. Because I know I've definitely in past jobs thought that I'm improving the process by changing it, only to realize that like 15 years ago they changed it to that for a specific reason that none of us knew, and nobody nobody who worked there anymore knew. And then all of a sudden that issue came back up.
Yeah. I think on the short term also, the morning meeting is really effective because we've sort of started talking about what improvements we made and sort of the thinking behind it. And even if you don't cover everything, I think it starts building this confidence that if some SOP seems a little, indirect or like added steps or weird steps that you don't quite understand, I think it builds confidence that there's thought been put in behind it. That's not to say you shouldn't change it, but you should at least go talk to someone about what was this fixing? But I like the idea of a change log because that's sort of low friction, and at least the data is sort of captured and you can go read it.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I sort of have a belief. I'm not sure if this applies everywhere, but I sort of want to believe that most like genuinely good improvements are somewhat self-propagating because they should be the easiest and most effective way to do something. Obviously that doesn't work everywhere, and there are plenty of things that are counterintuitive. In our shop, I wouldn't say we've like put a good process in place yet to continue this as we grow. So that's something else for us to think about. Right now, we're a very small team. Tends to be that anything we implement comes out of a group discussion. Like one of us might kind of bring the spark or the concept, but we usually discuss possible implementation routes before we do it, especially for anything big. So yeah, I think kind of morning meeting scrums is a good way just to kind of like go over it. And then it should be, if it's a, down the line, it seems like just having it be part of the training is key. But yeah, I don't know if I have a really good answer for that. I think this is definitely a work in progress for us both.
Yeah. And in terms of not putting in effort to things that don't pan out, my big fear, even more so after talking to other people who are sort of further down this road, is putting a lot of time into documentation and then they become stale and no one bothers updating them. And so then they're just like a bunch of crap hanging around your shop that's actually not the current method. And it's so much work that you've put into all that documentation that you kind of don't want to go update it. And I don't know. So like for us, maybe like some of the documents we've made, we laminate and then just have a dry erase marker there. So at least like updates get captured. And then once it gets cluttered enough, we'll go do an update. Another thing on our list is adding QR codes to the bottom of documents so that you can immediately scan it and jump right back into that document. So you're not wasting time like, where was this stored? Where was this SOP to edit it? So just trying to reduce the friction of making updates, I think is like high on our list so that they don't become stale. Like that's my big worry, is just doing a lot of documentation for the sake of it. And then it's like not actually how people are doing things.
Yeah. I do also think
sure happens.
Yeah. I think systems where people are sort of like siloed are more prone to issues maybe too. I think if you have a system where there's a lot of handoffs between individuals for a complete process to happen, there's sort of a lot more checks and balances built into the system. Whereas, I kind of like going maybe to like the prototype versus like a large, prototype sort of environment where one person handles everything from like opening a part file to finishing and packing a part. Like there's a lot more room in that system for someone to just kind of find their own way to do it and not document it. Whereas like if one person quotes it and then hands it off to another person who programs it and hands it off to another person who sets it up, who hands it off to another person who runs it, who hands it off to another person who ships it, like those handoffs sort of, it becomes really obvious very quickly when those systems break down. And so I think it's easier to maintain them because it's a requirement. I don't know. That's a theory of mine. I haven't borne that out and haven't run a control experiment.
Right. Yeah. Let's see. Debris Brooms asked, are there any SMED or lean principles you guys can't get behind?
I don't know if I feel like I'm very much like at the beginning of this whole journey and throwing, I don't know. It's kind of like they've been doing this a long time. I'm not ready to throw anything under the bus based on my like very kind of like toddler perspective.
I would 100% agree with that. In fact, I think every book I've read, there's aspects that I do not understand how it makes sense at all. And like talking it through with other people, it's just like, this really doesn't make sense. And then a few months later, once you've implemented other aspects of the general approach, it becomes clear like why that need exists and why it's not just like added labor, added, I don't know, expense, time, all that stuff. So, and then I think if you zoom all the way out of like away from all the tools that are sort of documented in a lot of these books and actually read the whole book, there's a big emphasis on like, this is not a set of tools. This is not a set of things you should do. This is an approach to solving problems that has been incredibly effective. And these are the tools that have come out of that way of thinking for this particular manufacturer or in this particular business. Like Toyota here, everyone thinks about cars, but in Japan, they build homes,
like all kinds of stuff.
They do textiles. So,
yeah, I think probably any one of the principles or SMED. Yeah, SMED is one of the or one of the tools, I guess. I think if you were to use any one of them, sort of like exclusively or without balancing them against the other principles, you're going to have a sort of a bad solution. And if you don't try and apply them to your particular process, there's probably going to be a lot of things that go wrong. So kind of tagging on to what Uriel just said, like, yeah, it's I've come away from this as being like, it's a philosophy first, it's an approach, maybe a philosophical approach that's fairly all encompassing, and then a lot of things are born out from that, and then you have to apply those specifically to your situation, and in that process you're going to work out the kinks.
Yeah. And one piece, I guess, I think if you kind of look at the approach, I think the thing it really changed for me in terms of like opening my eyes to are some of the global efficiencies that can be achieved at the price of local efficiencies. And that I was less aware of and spent less time thinking of. Like, it's really easy to dive into a particular station or operation and go like, how can I shave all the like excess motion out of this or any of this other stuff? But it's a little bit harder or less obvious to just go like, how quickly does a piece of material transform from a raw material to shipped goods? I don't know, all this stuff. And I think like sort of focusing more on the global and less on the local optimums was a shift. And yeah, anyway. So I think like focusing on that is always good.
Yeah, no, that makes sense for sure.
And also we're just like 100% not experts. We're just like
yeah, that too.
trying real hard.
Yeah. Well, and I think like you guys kind of touched on it, that it's a way of thinking and not a instruction guide. Like, it's like, you know what a lot of people say about college, that like you go to a job after college and they say, great, you learned how to learn. That's what we really care about.
Yeah.
Right.
And like, I think it's very similar to like SMED and Lean and the Toyota way and stuff, where it's like, now you know how to think globally and how to think about your problems correctly, not maybe this specific thing that we did in our factory.
Totally. And I would say, to the point of not being experts, if just reading those books, like the level of training that Toyota people go through before internally they're considered even competent is pretty mind-blowing. And so I think anyone who's been doing this stuff for less than like 10 to 20 years and is like, here are the answers for your organization,
run away.
I don't know about run away. Like, I've gotten a lot of value from people's content who are, I would say, are sort of in that camp, but maybe are misrepresenting how much, I don't know, not to throw anyone on their bus. I think like people, like, there is still great value in people who are, I mean, I hope we're adding value, even though we're pretty much at the beginning of this, just by bringing up the concepts and exploring them and wrestling with them. But I think if I said like, oh, I'm a lean expert and I'm going to help you implement Kanban in your shop and please pay me, I don't know, I would have some questions.
Right. They're representing themselves as a master and not as a learner who's just further ahead than you.
Yeah, maybe that's it. Yeah.
Or Toyota might argue that you're always a learner.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
Yeah. I don't know.
All right. Hudson Maid asked, what seemingly small improvement had the largest unforeseen benefit for you guys?
Reading the Toyota production system.
Yeah, I don't
Well, so
know.
I'll share one of mine, because another question I had was, what's the most expensive improvement and cheapest improvement? And my
Mm.
cheapest improvement was these fiberglass bins that Easton turned me on to for material storage.
Oh
And so
yeah,
we went from like a material shelf that was just like I had so much material on the shelf, but it was so disorganized that every time a new order came in, I would just buy new material from McMaster, even if I probably had something on the shelf, because it's like I'm going to spend
Right.
30 minutes looking for this. And
yeah,
like now, all of our aluminum, which is most of what we do, is divided up by thickness of the bar. And like I would say maybe 80% or 70% of the orders that come through now, we can just walk over there and be like, yep, we got it. Or no, we
Wow.
don't. But like we know specifically that we do or don't.
that's fantastic. Yeah, I would say um, hand like distributing some of the workload in the shop, and sort of that's tied into this recent like job board thing that we've done. But yeah, as like kind of the business owner, administrator, etc., handing off tool purchasing and material purchasing was, I had no idea how much time it was kind of sucking up for me. Um, and then going from our online software based job management, I mean, we're still using it a little bit, but going from that to this physical board on the wall was fairly transformative and cost very little money. And we're just much more effective all of a sudden.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I have a few. One is color coding has been absolutely huge in the shop, in terms of organization, in terms of just mental load in the shop. Um, that was definitely a big one. Yeah, and the unforeseen part there was definitely the mental load aspect, I would say. I had another one that I'm forgetting. Cheap improvements. Um, yeah,
Or
I'll have
just
to think.
small. I mean, it could have been a $10,000 tiny little piece of something, but what's a small improvement?
As it often
Like
is in our business.
Well, I mean,
yeah, seriously.
yeah, if we're talking $10,000, the gripper, for us moving to part automation instead of like huge pallets or just higher, part density work holding, that was transformative. And the unforeseen part there, it wasn't entirely unforeseen, but the level of that it bore out to, was just basically that prototyping, like the shift from prototyping to actual production is really effortless at this point. And like effortless might sound like an exaggeration, but basically your prototyping process is so tightly coupled to production that it actually, like the end of your prototyping process, you have refined the production tooling, right? Like your work holding, like sometimes you have to modify the soft jaws a little because you needed clearance you didn't expect, and that is all done in the prototyping process. And so at the end you have a highly producible part that doesn't require another big lift and like fixture design and all this other stuff. You just like basically program the gripper, which takes like realistically 25 minutes to get everything plugged in, and then another like probably half an hour to be comfortable about that it's doing everything it should be doing.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. All right. 5 best purchases from the last year. So not improvements. Well, I mean, they can be improvements, but specifically things you have bought that you are happy you bought in the last year.
I mean, I could list 5 books. The books have been super helpful.
Well, what's the best book out of the last year?
Ooh, that is a tough one. They're all very good. I mean, A Study of the Toyota Production System I thought was very good, from Shigeo Shingo. SMED was more mind-blowing, I would say, also Shigeo Shingo. I just read a book, Designing the Future, that I really enjoyed, but is maybe a little bit less applicable. It's more on the R&D side, but that applies to developing new processes also. How about you?
It's not technically in the last year, but our auto saw was a big improvement that kind of this actually sort of falls in the unforeseen benefits. Like we got it because we were having like our old manual saw was like an actual bottleneck. Having looked back, we probably could have improved it a little bit and made it less so, but instead we bought an auto saw, um, thinking that mostly it was to reduce that bottleneck. But kind of the largest improvement was just process reliability, because it cuts so square and everything's exactly the same size, and there's never any question that it's like correct and it is what it's supposed to be. So that had a lot of downstream effects, as well as being able to handle titanium jobs a lot more like cost effectively, because we weren't having to outsource the sawing, and it was a lot easier to source material. So that was a really big one, honestly. And then similarly, like buying the gripper and the Shunk pneumatic vices was also technically not in the last year, but just passed. But that was a big eye opener, and has kind of like started me down a whole road that I probably wouldn't be on otherwise.
Awesome. Our screw compressor is really high on the list as well. I sort of forgot about that.
Yeah, I bet that's like such a quality of life improvement when you stop hearing the pistons just like banging against your head all day.
Definitely that, but also we had these crappy little compressors. I mean, they're not crappy. I was so impressed that they ran under the conditions we put them in. They were little California Air compressors, and I think they're rated at 25% cycle time out of an hour.
Oh, jeez.
We were running them basically flat out all day long, to the point where I redirected the like auto drain to spray water onto the cylinder heads, and then I had a fan to cool them. But they would still overheat all the time. And then I was like, is this anyway? It was not good. And then last summer, it was just like got to a point where it was such a variable of whether we'd be able to run production that I was like, this is not viable. So
yeah.
Well, I'll go for a couple of them. The sending our post editing out has been amazing. Like just having somebody I can just fire off an email on, Friday afternoon and be like, "Hey, I need let's start exploring this," and then I get a rough draft like the next week.
Yeah.
That Milwaukee backpack vacuum has like our shop has never been cleaner. I think I've used it probably almost every day since I got it, because it's just easy. Like I hated our shop. I hated our shop vac so much because like it was always either tangled up in cords, or like we had one of those Oneida dust deputies on it, and like that made it top heavy, and so it was a pain to move around, and like it was enough of a pain that it made cleaning a pain, and so like we just didn't do it. And like now that this thing, like I bought the fast cap little backpack mount, and so it's just right there on the wall. I just put it on real quick, throw a battery in it, hit the whole shop before I go home. Like I liked it enough that I bought one for my house, because I was like, I hate cords. Like having a cordless vacuum is just where it's at. So I definitely thank the guys over at Jack's Manufacturing or Jack's Precision for that.
Yeah, definitely. I'm thinking I might buy one after this podcast. They've been on my list for a while.
I've been dubious just because I love sweeping, but I know that's not a. That's not
I don't like kicking up the dust.
Yeah, we don't have so much dust. It's mostly just a lot of chips.
For us, we are like the entry to the shop is sort of this like crushed gravel, and I think it gets tracked in a good deal, which is kind of frustrating.
Yeah.
Yeah,
interesting.
I could see that being really frustrating. Our optical comparator is another one that I had been wanting an optical comparator for years now, and I finally found the brand I wanted on eBay and got it. And like it was one of those things that Brad was like, I don't really see us needing this. And then I think like a week ago he was like, how did we ever get by without this? Like,
yeah, that's awesome.
Oh, actually, that reminds me, we just got that Michitoyo height gauge, and that's been pretty sweet. It's definitely not like we're not using it like every 5 minutes, but when we need it, it's pretty fantastic.
Yeah, that's exactly how we feel about the OC. Like it's one of those things like, yeah, you don't use it maybe every day, but there's no other way to inspect some of the features we've done on it. It's like, oh, this is the way to do it.
Yeah, totally.
Paperless is another one that I'm really happy we bought into. Like there's been some quote packages in the last, I don't know, it's almost been a year, I think, since we started down that rabbit hole, that like would have just taken me hours and hours and hours to get out. And now they're 15 minutes, 20 minutes.
Yeah, I'm like teetering upon the fence to jump in on that. There's a few like workflow issues I think we need to handle, like primarily how we're going to handle the downstream outflow.
Mhm.
But it's it's making
In terms of what?
In terms of like the internal job management with the data that comes out of paperless and
Gotcha.
just kind of like boring nitty gritty, like not wanting to hand like Ohio, they'll only handle it once,
Right,
during,
right.
like because we are running a kind of multi-person handoff system.
That makes sense.
I really want to make sure that anything that comes out of there doesn't have to be edited or like there's no question that it's correct. So yeah, anyway, that's a story for another day because it doesn't exist yet. But
Yeah, no, data management in general is very tough to do correctly.
yeah, there's an aspect of it that that seems like really key that a lot of people don't seem to prioritize for some reason is like, yeah, it sort of ties into what we were talking about earlier, but just like making sure it stays current. And like the easiest, we dealt with this with our ERP system that we have that was built in Airtable, where you could template a job so that if the job repeated, it would repopulate with all of the stuff you did last time, which is great. Except the way that it was set up, it would repopulate with the original, not with the most recent. So if you made edits, because we're constantly improving our approach and how we do things, those wouldn't be carried forward. And it was
weird.
this major, it's just like, this is mind-numbingly stupid. And, similarly like G-code management, like you kind of have to figure out a good system so that there's no question that whatever the code is in the file is the correct one, no workarounds, etc. So yeah, it's a big,
Right. Yeah,
big thing
for sure. Well, I did see paperless parts updated 3 days ago, that they have historical order import now to quotes.
Oh,
So you can go back to your most recent order of that and then say, bring this into my new quote.
oh, very cool. Was it before it was just kind of like pick one?
Before, I don't think you could directly bring that quote item into your new quote. You had to like go look at the old one and bring your numbers in manually. You couldn't just say like, this is the same thing, bring it in, let's do it.
Gotcha. Oh yeah, that's a huge improvement.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
Well, we kind of already talked about shop news and new things. Anything you guys want to touch on that you're pretty happy about that you're doing?
There's been a lot going on. Yeah.
I don't know. We mentioned we were doing a podcast. I don't know. Did we mention the name of the podcast? I forgot.
I think I said it, but if not, please
cool.
plug it because it'll be in the show notes too. I'll tag both your guys' individuals and the podcast.
Oh, sweet. Yeah, Incremental, the continuous improvement podcast. That's been a lot of fun.
Yeah.
The conversations have been a lot of fun from that. So that's, I'd say that's up there with recent projects.
The stuff I've been working on is not super sexy. It's mostly been kind of this job management, data flow, like internal organization stuff. It has been massively like effective, so that's cool, but talking about it is kind of boring. So that's kind of our main goal is streamlining. I've been also working with a guy to do post editing. There's more to do, but that's been pretty awesome. And I think we're on the brink of being able to smoothly implement rotary fixture offset probing straight out of CAM. So I'm not going to speak too soon because I haven't actually had a chance to test it yet, but we're like very close.
That'll be killer.
Yeah, it'll be a major workflow enhancement. Like just having to not have variability between 4th axis and 3 axis jobs and how we set them up and probe them will be a big deal. The R450 is just awesome. Like everybody should just buy one, basically. Definitely want a few more.
That and a Milwaukee backpack vacuum.
Yeah.
Highly recommend it.
Use the backpack vacuum to clean up all the chips.
There you go.
So many chips. Yeah.
We've started shipping a new product, so that's very exciting. It's not on the website yet, but I feel like this is my third time on this podcast, and every time I've said like, we're about to release a new product. We actually are shipping it, and so that's exciting. Not on the website yet. Right now it's mostly for bag makers and less like interesting to like direct to consumer, but soon we're working on a press so that you can retrofit it to existing bags without doing any sewing. So that's exciting.
That the D-hook or
this is a ladder lock. So it's the piece of hardware at the end of your shoulder strap on a backpack.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah,
very cool.
Because you had some bag makers who are using your standard cam locks, right? But it's kind of like bringing a gun to a knife fight.
I would say it's still useful there, because the issue with a ladder lock is it relies on constant tension to maintain position. So if you just repeatedly load and unload a ladder lock, I don't care who made the ladder lock, just inherently it will shift. So like if you're running with a backpack or backpacking just normal, every now and then you sort of have to do one of those like retighten moves. So it's still useful from that perspective, but these ones basically the angle of that the webbing exits the hardware is makes more sense for that application. So if you're not running with the backpack, maybe it is bring a gun to a fight. But it's still like the load capacity is huge, and I have slammed it in car doors a bunch to. I wouldn't recommend it, because if you care about your car,
I'm gonna get a video of that scientific testing.
Bam, bam. Like that still holds.
Oh boy. Alrighty, well, that brings me to the last question I ask every guest every week. And actually now I have two questions. I just started it on my last episode, but we'll start with, what did you research this week?
I am researching how to pour foundation footers. We're about to start building a house, and I'm going to have to do a lot of the work myself. So, we have a little mini excavator. So I spent the last couple of weeks digging. Yeah. No other way to say that. And prepping to start pouring forms and stuff as soon as we are making forms to pour as soon as we get our permit approvals and whatnot.
It's exciting.
Awesome.
I've been researching robotic arms quite a bit, paint systems, and then also as a morbid curiosity that I can't avoid, closed die forging. So the reason this is funny is because Devin and I've called Devin about this a few times and to discuss, and the consensus is definitely that it makes no sense to pursue at this stage. But here I am. So the interesting piece there that I will mention, the tonnage I'll need, I'm not quite sure exactly, but it's pretty high. So I don't really want to dive into that, but a way that I can sort of scratch the itch without spending a ton of money or time is you can freeze like clay, oil clay, like plastiline, and it simulates hot metal. Or just reduced tonnage with cold metal, like the way it flows. And so I think I'm just going to start by 3D printing molds to start to understand like how it will move inside a mold, how many die closes because you can like do some preforming to get the material into a general shape you want before finishing the die. I'm also curious about like basically my suspicion is like preforming, then forming, then punching out your windows and everything, and then doing one last die close could get you really high precision. There's this thing called high precision forging, where like auto parts, they're making gears that don't need any post processing, which is insane.
Wow.
And that's basically getting your material volume dead on to do a last forging where the die fully closes. And so you've dealt with your flash, and you also have the right amount of volume to like force the metal into all the corners of your cavity. But I'm thinking there's a good amount of, feel to that and knowledge to get it right. So I figure 3D printing and plastiline are going to be a lot cheaper than buying like a 200-ton press and starting to mess with it and cutting tool steel. And
is this coming from eliminating machining or increasing strength or both? Or
yeah, both.
Where did this? Okay,
so basically I was, again, every time I'm on the podcast talking about getting another CNC, and I'm still talking about it, to increase capacity. And it occurred to me that with that amount of cash, trying to think about, are there other ways of spending that cash that would be a more efficient way to increase capacity? And forging, those presses are not as expensive as CNCs. And so if it eliminated, 40, 50, 60% of cycle times, then that would be a huge win. And then there's the added factor of the strength, and just the cost that we could offer the buckles at, I think, would be improved. I don't know how much exactly, because there would be some post machining and tooling costs and whatever. So, but more than that, I think once I thought about it, it was just hard to get it out of my head. That, and then also lean product development. I've been doing a lot more reading on that, and super interesting stuff. A lot of it stuff I'm already doing. Like I sort of had a bit of a career in product development for different startups, and turns out this is why I kept getting work, because I was doing a lot of those pieces. But really interesting to learn more about it and just sort of hear it very clearly articulated, and the reduction in waste and cost associated with some of those practices are pretty useful, especially if you're then trying to have a conversation with a client about why you are doing stuff the way you are, because some of it sort of defers perceived progress, I would say. Anyway, so that's been a lot of fun.
Awesome. That's great. Well, then the other question that I am now asking is, what are you working on to be a better person, leader, employee, any or all of the above?
I would say a big focus of mine, now that we've grown the team a little bit, is trying to figure out how to create a culture of continuous improvement. And then I sort of grew up in a funny family, I guess. I'm realizing more and more, but like problem solving was always something we talked a lot about. And I think if you don't come from that, sort of developing and educating people so that they can do that effectively has really been on my mind. So like building a culture where every single person has the know-how to implement and see problems and then implement effective solutions, I think is going to take a substantial amount of concerted effort, and letting people fail, but not letting them fail too much. So I've been thinking a lot about that.
Yeah, I would say my main focus right now as the leader, employer, et cetera, is making sure that my people have what they need to do their job, and that they're not, I'm asking that on a regular basis to do their job, and also just to be happy in the shop. And then one of my goals for the next little while is to really tackle, compensation in a fair way. As well as, we just had a conversation last week where I was like, I don't want you guys to leave just because of money or something like that. So let's let's map out a roadmap for the business and you guys to get to where you need to be happy here, and for it also to be meeting your financial goals for the rest of your life. And that's a big drive for my business, is making sure that we're all taken care of well. So yeah, and that's simple stuff for a business my scale, of just being like, okay, what does it look like for us to start doing paid time off and sick leave? Like, that's something I don't know what to do. So let's figure out how to make it happen. And then, yeah, just trying to be really transparent and open about, kind of on the daily of what they need, and making sure everybody's happy and enjoying themselves at work, and also just trying to invest a lot in things that make their lives better in the shop and easier. To that end, I think we're probably going to buy a chip vac here pretty soon, because Ariel looks like she's about ready to quit every time we have an issue, which is understandable.
I can definitely empathize with that.
yeah. And there's part of, as like the whatever solo entrepreneur somewhere, you're like, whatever. I used to get up in there and have my, elbows deep in a bunch of coolant. And it's kind of like, well, this ain't her business. She doesn't have to be here. Let's make
Even in my own business, there's nothing that makes me think like maybe I made the wrong choice somewhere, as like a big coolant spill, or like having to clean out a sump that I've let go too long. You're like, man, is this where this is all lead? Like, is this what I need to be doing?
Yeah, totally. I will say the R450 goes through coolant at a staggering pace.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, it just runs like 9 hours a day without stopping for more than 2 seconds at a time. So it's like, it's moving chips and it's moving coolant.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting. And
That's
so
nuts.
the sump filled up with chips much faster than we anticipated. So we were getting like, it was doing the thing where it like sucks dry when it's running the wash down and the coolant. And we're like, what the heck? It's freaking full. And we're like, oh, it's full of chips.
So it's funny you say that, because you figured it wasn't chips buildup because of your experience on the
other machines.
So when I started using probing regularly for production, I thought my probe had broken. And then you were like, did you change your batteries? And I was like, well, no, but I just changed them. Like, I don't forget what it was, but like 2 months ago.
Yeah.
But now I'm probing a lot. And so it runs through them quickly.
Yeah.
Well, not only that, and you can also have a probe tip loose, which has bitten me once, both on the probe and then indicator tips fairly frequently have bitten me in the past.
Huh.
Have to keep
like, why is this indicating so poorly? And then you like check your tip and you're like, oh, it's got 3 threads out. It's like wobbling in there almost. Yeah. Cool.
On the R machine recently, it was like kind of this ongoing saga of getting it up and running. And there was the expanded jig area issue and all this stuff. And then I think I maybe sent you a photo of it, but we put this job on there and I was like, God damn it. Like the probe's messed up. Like, what is it going to be next on this machine? And it turned out that we had gotten I'd ordered some titanium. I'd opted to get it pre-sawn because they were going to charge me the same either way. And I was like, whatever, I'll just get it pre-sawn. I don't have to deal with it. They were sawing these blanks so out of square that when I probed some random spot visually, I'd get one value. And then when the machine probed it, it would get another value. And because there wasn't a lot of stock to work with, that lower value meant that it like cut the top of the vice jaws. And I was just like, I just assumed that something terrible was happening with the probe, but it was just the fact that the stock was like 60 thousandths out over like 2 inches.
Jeez.
Ugh. Yeah.
That sounds like me on my manual bandsaw.
Yeah. Pretty much.
Good at all.
Pretty much. Yeah.
Oh boy. Well, guys, thank you so much for taking the time to join me. One more time, let everybody know where they can find you and the podcast and all that good stuff.
Yeah. Devin at Lycan_MFG. The podcast is incremental.ci. No dot. Incremental
CI. On Instagram.
Yeah.
And then I am Uriel Eisen. On Instagram, austere_manufacturing. And drop us a line.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, thank you both again. Thanks to all the Patreon members who make this show possible. And thank you for listening. I'll be back next week.